What's that can't stop laughing moment where you're in a situation you shouldn't be laughing? At a funeral, the pastor kept referring to God as the Great Comforter, and all I could think of was a tacky bedspread glowing with holy light. Every time he said it, my giggles got worse to the point I had to pretend I was crying really hard and left to hide in the bathroom. My father's funeral. My daughter was 3 months old and had a lot of belly pain. She farted so loudly that the priest needed to stop talking for us to stop laughing. He even told us that the church was a serious place and if we couldn't behave to get out. I told him the deceased was my father and I couldn't control my daughter's farts. My friends from college and I are still super close even 15 years later. There's an inside joke involving giving people a specific fake name that we always laugh about when we get together. Last week one of these friends tried to kill himself. We'll call him John. John's brother, another of the close friends, called me and told me that John had tried to kill himself and that he was at the hospital. Then he tells me that when asked for identification at the scene of the suicide attempt, John gave the paramedics the fake name from college. As sad as I was about what had happened, I bust out laughing so hard when he told me. I couldn't help it. I'm laughing now even thinking about it. All of the other members of the group had the same reaction when John's brother called them. All of them. We've got Lake of Fireside property in hell. Cheers. When I was a second year law student, I had a classmate abruptly get up mid-lecture and waddle quickly out of the lecture hall. There were about 90 students in the lecture, and, in law school, the academic approach is the Socratic method, which is usually the professor and one student going 1:1 during the course of a lecture/class. The dude comes back into the classroom and the professor abruptly halts his current line of questioning with another student. I'm front of the class. The professor asks the returning student, "Is everything okay?" The student responds, "Bad ship at all," and walked back to his seat. I spent the rest of the lecture period giggling through the professor grilling students about family law. Back in 2004, I was at my cousin's funeral, and my aunt was in such a shocked state, she couldn't stop laughing. She was known to do this at funerals. Because laughing is contagious, I also started laughing a little bit, and I had to go to the back of the church and to the bathroom to get it out of me. My mother and father went to a funeral of one of mother's aunts that she was not close to. In fact, my father had never met her. As they stood at the open casket, my father said to my mother, "She just doesn't look like herself again." My father had never seen the aunt before. For whatever reason, this struck my mother as very funny, and she started laughing. She held her hands to her face and ran from the casket. Her sister saw this and thought she distraught and followed her out to console her, where my mother had to explain that she was laughing and not crying and why. She was so pissed at my father it was hilarious. My granddad had, if you don't know me by now, played as the curtains closed at his funeral. Shouldn't have laughed. Couldn't help it. Legend. I was at church for my grandfather's 5th year death anniversary and the guy singing was so bad my grandma and me were almost died from laughter. Visiting my grandmother's grave with my grandfather for the first time a few years ago. Expected tears and a solemn day. Instead we passed a grave marked "Wanda" and my grandfather said, "Well, I wonder what killed her." None of us could stop laughing. My grandmother would have loved it. My senior year of high school, I went to this memorial breakfast with my principal and a few other seniors because my principal was begging a few of us to go and hey, free breakfast. So getting to the end, this woman starts singing an incredibly moving song and she's doing beautifully. But I look over at my principal and he just looks so dead. Like his face was completely blank, and because I also don't deal well with emotion apparently, I thought it was the funniest thing ever. So while this lady is singing and some people are crying, I'm losing my mind and trying so hard to stop laughing and I can't. My friends thought I was having a complete mental breakdown, like I'd finally lost my mind or something. I felt absolutely horrible about it and ducked out as soon as I could. Last year's Thanksgiving, right before the meal, we all stood in a big circle and said a prayer and what we are thankful for. Well, my mom's uncle, I will refer to him as uncle. His name is Dick. Yes, Uncle Dick. When we all stood up, it was revealed that Uncle Dick had forgotten to zip up his jeans after going to the bathroom. My dad and I were directly across from Uncle Dick, and we were barely keeping from bursting out in all our laughter. Then he leaned over to me and whispered, "I'm thankful that Uncle Dick remembered to put on fresh underwear this morning." About halfway through the meal we were still laughing about it when Grandma came over to yell at us for being distracting. She basically asked what we were laughing at in a not so nice voice. We pointed her gaze across the room and she couldn't help but laugh a bit. We told her it had been like that the whole meal. The way we had the tables set up was a big square of folding banquet tables, so we could look out straight ahead of us at Uncle Dick's boxes. In school we did a course on mythology and had a project where we had to write our own mythological stories for the creation of creatures/places/etc. One kid wrote a story about how a man was abusing his horse, so the gods cursed him. One day his horse threw him onto a spear, which went through the back of his head and out of his forehead, and he transformed into the first unicorn. I couldn't fucking stop laughing for a solid 5 minutes. The teacher berated me for laughing at violence, but the kid and I both thought that was funny as shit. Went to a roadkill call, human roadkill, and had to scrape brain/guts off the pavement with a shovel. While doing so it reminded me that, as soon as I got back to the station I needed to start preparing the spaghetti meat sauce for dinner. Mentioned it to my captain and we giggled on the side of the highway while shoveling some poor bastard into a garbage bag. During a cathedral confirmation liturgy, the bishop let out a resounding fart in the reverberant room as he elevated the host. Immediately, the deacon began swinging the incense pot, furible, because the altar boys kneeling directly behind the bishop started holding their noses and waving their hands. Not me, but my friend. She was getting fired from her job, and all she could think about was what'll it be, fellas? Mustard or ketchup from the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. On the best date of my life I went to see a really stupid movie, A Walk to Remember, edit cause many are asking, with my first girlfriend. We were sitting in the 4th to 5th row from the screen and 2 rows ahead of us were a group of younger girls. One of them is rushing back to her seat with her friends, and she slips and falls. It was a nasty fall too, and even though I felt bad for her I couldn't stop laughing. It was awful. I don't know why I couldn't stop, and I was even like, God, I know I shouldn't laugh, but that's just making me laugh harder. It took me at least 10 minutes to stop. Girl who fell. If you're out there somewhere, I hope my laughing didn't make you feel bad. To this day I still don't really get why it was so damn funny to me. I was in a local support group for friends and relatives of people with bipolar disorder. One person was relating the story of her older teenage daughter who, in a manic episode, grabbed a flashlight and took it upon herself to stand in a downtown intersection and direct traffic until she was picked up by the police and taken to the hospital. I kind of covered my mouth and pretended I was having a coughing fit and excused myself to go to the restroom. Used to be a member of student council back in college, and this one time during a meeting with the campus dean who was explaining, very seriously, how some students were shitting on the toilet walls and throwing literal shit on the toilet ceilings which were building up expenses for cleaning. Was asked to give ideas on how to tackle the issue, and I clearly remember trying not to laugh and holding it in perfectly, but then as I made eye contact with a friend of mine in the council we bursted out laughing to the point where our stomachs started to hurt, which led to other members of the council laughing out loud. It was the first time meeting the campus dean as well. After that, anytime I'd see him, he'd give me a dirty look. I heard a kid fart in church during a wedding. I had to remove myself because I couldn't get it under control. It was one of those loud echo of the old wooden pew farts. When I worked with a financial advisor, he misspoke and asked me to check a client's investment in Blackcock instead of BlackRock, an industry fund. He didn't realize what he'd said, and he was super big on maintaining a professional, humorless working environment, so I couldn't point it out. I managed to keep a straight face long enough to excuse myself, then spent 15 minutes wheezing in a spare office. Oh god. My professor was very solemnly telling us during an emotional discussion about when he watched the North Tower fall on 9/11. I was so horrified that I started laughing. I physically couldn't stop, and my eyes were begging for help. I laugh uncontrollably when I'm uncomfortable, and that was one of my worst moments. In high school there was 3 religion courses you could pick: Catholic, Evangelic, Edit, I'm told it's Protestant in English, or neutral. You would have different topics in class and different destinations on the yearly trip. I picked Catholic, and on the yearly trip we went to a monastery. On the 3rd day one of the exercises was to talk about death. So there's 20 kids in a circle of chairs and everyone's crying because everyone lost a loved one at some point, and death is a hard topic. The teacher starts talking about how she imagines death to be like, and begins to tell, I imagine after dying there to be a long spiral staircase. And you go down and down until there's a door, and behind that door. The rest I didn't hear because my friend next to me whispers, a Mufakan kebab stand. We both sat there giggling for like 20 more minutes until the meeting was over. To this day I feel really bad. I had this really nice, but really awkward physics teacher in high school. He was a large nerdy man, but spoke with a lisp and a very soft voice. Imagine the guy from Office Space asking for his stapler, that's how he sounded. One day he is giving his lesson and mid-sentence he goes from this voice to what sounded like Satan himself. Okay class please, deep hell voice, take out your books, cough cough excuse me, must have something in my throat. Then continued like nothing happened. I could not, for the life of me, stop fucking laughing, and I was the only fucking one. It was the most bizarre and fucking hilarious thing I had ever seen. I had to walk out of the class to catch my composure. This was at least 15 years ago now, and I'll never forget it. At a funeral. There was a slushy machine in my cousin's and I wreaked havoc on that thing. Ended up having one of those moments where everything is funny and you can't stop laughing. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to consider the idea to maybe think about potentially subscribing. Peace.